All right. Yeah. Okay, so I'll make a start. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Hope you're enjoying your lunch from wherever you are. Hope it's all right. Today I'm going to run through, actually I should introduce myself first. My name is Danny Grasso. Hopefully everyone in the room knows me. Today what I wanted to do is run through some of what is happening with Windows 2019, some of the stuff that I managed to see over at Microsoft Ignite 2018. I've been involved with Windows Server, I think since Server 2000. Some people have probably been involved with Server from before that, in the NT 3.5 and the NT 4 days. I missed out on all of that fun. And some people might not have been with Server that or been using Server that long. I went to Ignite with this idea, basically with my head in the clouds, or the cloud, I should say. Azure, thank you, Frank. Basically, I didn't expect a lot from Server 2019, or a lot of news about Server 2019, and I was actually quite surprised with what's going on, and there's a lot of cool stuff there around Server 2019. I wanted to run through that with you today. So one of the other things, if you're interested in seeing the original presentation from Ignite 2018, Windows Server 2019 Deep Dive was a session. If you search at the myignite.techcommunity.microsoft.com website and search on that code, that BRK code in the top right, then that'll take you to this session. Jeff Woolsey, my apologies, presented this. Very funny speaker. Did very well. So what I wanted to cover off today, just from an agenda point of view, we'll take a look at Windows Admin Center first and what's new and happening there. Then I want to take us through some of the hybrid capabilities in Server 2019. I promised that we'd have some demos, so I think I've got at least 3 demos, possibly 4 demos today. We'll see how we go for time. I wanted to talk about some of the hardware advancements around Hyper-converged in Server 2019. Look at some or one of the, in particular, security solutions around Azure password management, and also take a look at Server Core, because it's an important part of where Windows Server is heading, and there's some valuable stuff there for us. So I want to kick off by taking a little bit of a history lesson. And when Server 2012, I'll only go back as far as 2012, I won't go back as far as 2000. But one of the things we saw was questions around 2012 and 2012 R2. Was it cloud ready? And a lot of the conversations or a lot of the headlines at the time are around building private clouds, talking about private cloud, not necessarily public cloud, and building cloud infrastructure with System Center. So we saw a lot of that around 2012. When 2016 was released, Aaron Chappell, the general manager for Windows Server, made this statement. I won't read it out there, but basically was talking again about cloud and cloud capability in Server, and said it's the cloud ready OS. And that was kind of the definition of what cloud ready meant at the time. So what does it look like today? So basically, when we think about cloud and cloud ready, we have 3 core areas that Microsoft are focusing on. So Azure is obviously a big part of that, being the public cloud. The bottom left there, or the left side, the hybrid data center, is that on-premises component of cloud where we have Windows Server. WSSD is a new acronym for Storage Spaces Direct, so we don't get it confused with solid-state drives. SQL.NET containers, all on-premises, and then over on the right, the Azure Stack is, and this forms that concept of Microsoft's hybrid cloud. And one of the interesting things around this is that Microsoft are calling, in Server 2019 in particular, these components are built in and not bolted on. So they've used that term before, and it's kind of a big ask in a lot of ways, because when you say something's built in, You have the expectation that everything is there ready to go. So it's a big ask because in some cases, you're going to have to add components to make full use of that. One of the examples I like is that around the telemetry in Windows Server and in Windows 10 Client. So there's telemetry capability that's built into the core of the operating system. You don't have to download that code and install it. It's already there, but you might have to install something or turn it on to enable something to consume that data. So that's what Microsoft kind of mean when they're talking about built-in and not bolted on. And that means it's easier, in essence, to make use of those features. One of the things I wanted to talk about today, and the session will focus around the 4 key areas down at the bottom of the screen there. So we're looking at the hybrid, hyper-converged infrastructure, security, and application innovation. So to start with, let's talk about the Windows Admin Center. And this is what the Windows Admin Center looks like. We'll have a look at the demo in a few minutes, and I'll give you a little bit of a deeper look at that. This is a free tool. It was released, a general admin release just recently. I think 1809 was the release, so that's September. And it's also available under the technical preview program, the Insider program. One of the really interesting things about what Microsoft is doing in the Windows Admin Center is that they're inviting, and there are quite a lot of plugins to the Admin Center. So this is a way of managing Windows Server. Having those plugins means that you've got capability out of the box to manage better, manage more efficiently. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. One of the interesting things, though, and one of the parallels I draw is in Server 2016, Server 2012 R2, in the Server Manager, that annoying Server Manager that pops up every single time you log onto a server console. How many plugins have you seen from vendors for the Server Manager? So I can think of 0, right? So there's a big difference in the approach for the Windows Admin Center. If you haven't seen the Windows Admin Center or haven't even heard of it yet, there's a URL. I think I'll post it on LinkedIn. I'll have it available on our website after the presentation. It's like 3 miles long, so I didn't want people scrabbling to write that down. But it talks about the Admin Center release. So I mentioned the partner extensions, the ones that are available or were available or announced at Ignite. So Fujitsu have extensions generally available. Data-On have version 2 available already for use. And the benefit is, squared up, the benefit is these vendors are providing you not just monitoring capability of their hardware, but they're providing you with the capability to do hardware or take control of the hardware without having to go to another console. So there's efficient use of time here. You don't need to swap around. The concept around Windows Admin Center is to be able to manage everything from this one console. Obviously, we're not there yet, but having these hardware-based plugins make it a lot easier. And there you can see the Lenovo Storage Manager and the richness of the detail that the vendors are providing. So we're talking about like IPMI, baseboard controller type of functionality there. So the ability to remote power a machine through the Windows Admin Center without having to have any additional software to be able to do that. So again, good efficiency of time. What the Windows Admin Center is not, and I really wanted to talk about this. I didn't write this slide, okay? Particularly because of the second line down there that says System Center. People who know me will know my involvement with System Center, particularly Configuration Manager. What Windows Admin Center is not trying to be is it's not trying to be a replacement for System Center or for other more capable management tools. The way that I think about it is I think of the Windows Admin Center as a replacement to the Server Manager, to the Hyper-V Manager, and to the Failover Cluster Manager. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. We'll see that hopefully in some of the demos. But the Windows Admin Center, sorry, I was going to say that there are a lot of things that you would want your management software to do more than what the Admin Center will do. And a good example of that is, can you manage a Hyper-V cluster with just Failover Cluster Manager and Hyper-V Manager? The answer is yes, of course you can. But once I start to scale, once I get a lot of servers in my cluster, or once I want to take advantage of more advanced features, then I'm going to want to use something to manage that more effectively or to be able to take advantage of those new features. And that's what Windows Admin Center is not trying to do. It's not trying to be a replacement for those existing management solutions. So let's kick off and have a look at hybrid and what hybrid capability means according to Microsoft, or what does it look like? So the Azure Network Adapter is a component within Server 2019 from the Windows Admin Center where you can actually configure a point-to-site VPN connection through the Windows Admin Center. If the components don't exist, if the virtual network gateway doesn't exist in Azure, it'll go and set that up for you, probably with some defaults you don't want, but it will go ahead and do that. Simplification of that process, so better use of your time. It's an easier way to get connected directly to Azure from a server. Azure Site Recovery enables us to replicate virtual machines to Azure directly for purposes of disaster recovery or failover. Azure Backup, again, through the Windows Admin Center, we can manage Azure Backup directly from the Windows Admin Center to Azure without having to go to a different console, without having to RDP or connect to that server and configure the Windows Backup utility. And Azure Update Management, which is a really interesting one because Azure Update Management is the component that, and we'll see this in a second, allows you to hook into the Azure Security Center and manage your updates through the Azure Security Center if you're using that, rather than using WSUS on premises or the Windows Update Service. So that's an interesting change there. The whole benefit of that is that you're able to more effectively manage the environment. Again, efficiency of time without having to jump across to different consoles to be doing those things. If it's all together in one location, it should be easier. All right, so now I'm going to flick across to a demo of Azure Backup, and we'll see a little bit about what it can do. And I'll also show you the Windows Admin Center console. Okay, so this is a web-based console, and at face value it looks pretty bland. I'm just going to jump to a server here. This is not a 2019 server, and I'm doing this on purpose. So what I wanted to show you was just that you can manage previous versions of Windows. Some of the capabilities that Windows Server 2019 provides won't be there or won't be available on earlier versions of Windows. But on the left-hand side, you can see there's a rich amount of information. And just before I jump into the Azure Backup demo, one of the things that I did when I was first setting up Windows Server Core and the Windows Admin Center was I wanted to see how far I could take this from an efficiencies point of view. I basically just installed a Server Core OS, and we'll talk a little bit more about Server Core later. And I wanted to see if it got an IP address from DHCP from that point onwards, after I'd installed the OS, could I configure that server completely, domain join, do everything else through the Windows Admin Center without having to jump onto the console. And I think that was about 4 months ago, and I did 90% of that. I think remote access or RDP was the only thing that wasn't working at the time, and I think that's been resolved in later releases. So the screen you're looking at now, the overview screen, and I won't go into this into too much detail, but you get an idea that we've got some real-time statistics coming from servers that we can see. This is not static data, this is real-time data live coming from those servers, which is pretty impressive in a web browser. So you can install the Admin Center as a standalone on a computer, or you can install like a gateway service that you communicate with, and on that gateway service, all the servers communicate to that. And if you connect to Azure, then your gateway service talks out to Azure. All right, so if we have a look at backup on this server, what we're going to see here is basically I've already configured a backup job that's going directly from this server to Microsoft Azure. So I've got the job configured and running, and basically I don't need to jump onto the Windows Backup console on that server. I don't need to get information about how many jobs have run, what my recovery points are, to even restore data, to kick off a backup right now. I can just jump straight to that server link and do all of that from here. If I wanted to see what my recovery points were, I need to restore some data. I've got one from the 31st. I can go ahead and just step through a wizard to recover data directly from this console. I don't have to RDP to that server. I don't have to open another console. I do that directly from the Windows Admin Center. Right. Whoops, that's not what we want. All right. So this is just a very quick overview of how the integration is there between Azure Backup and the Windows Admin Center. So again, looking at efficiencies of time, right? Making our jobs simpler to be more effective in what we do, making the management of that server easier. The Azure Update Management is the next demo I wanted to show you. Now for this one, I'm just going to flick back across to that test environment. What I am going to have to do is just jump across to a different server console for a sec. And the reason that I'm doing this is because Microsoft were trying to authenticate me automatically using Microsoft Edge. So I had to grab a browser that wasn't going to try and automatically authenticate me. My demo environment's in a different domain to what my Azure environment is, and it was failing to authenticate with the Windows Update service. So I'm going to feed this back to Microsoft, because it's not always going to be the case that the environment that you're wanting to manage your updates with is going to match the Azure environment's domain necessarily, particularly from an MSP point of view. So in this case, you'll notice that the line there that updates and restarts are managed by Azure Update Management. I can still go ahead and do a lot of those things that I would normally do through Windows Update, through the Windows Update window on that server if I RDP to that server. I don't have to, again, I don't have to go to that server. I can do that right from here. I can modify the settings. I can check online from Microsoft Update. I can say, okay, stop managing it with Azure without actually even going to Azure and removing that relationship. Or I can go ahead and install updates. Right now I'm up to date. I don't have any updates to install, but if I did, I could schedule a restart and then go ahead and install those updates if I wanted to manually on this server. So I mentioned before that in this case, updates and restarts are managed by Azure Update Management. And so I'm not talking to WSUS on premises. I'm not talking to the Windows Update channel. I'm managing these through the Azure Security Center. So again, direct link in from the Windows Admin Center. All right. So let's flick back to the slides. So it's a little bit about hybrid and what Microsoft are doing in that space and what hybrid management means. And I don't know that anymore people are really pushing cloud only. That's our utopia, that's our goal. But from a real world perspective, we need to be able to manage hybrid environments. There are always going to be some services that are going to run really well in the cloud. Some services that we want to run on premises, we want to make the choice that's more cost effective for us, that works out best for business, provides us with the most capability, but also works well together. So that's what Microsoft are trying to do with hybrid. So if we move on to hyper-converged infrastructure and some of the changes Microsoft are making in that space. So hyper-converged infrastructure is basically a cluster that shares fabric for both storage and networking. So we don't have that separation anymore. The network fabric obviously needs to be able to support that and support that well, and there are some great guidelines about how to do that. Hyper-converged isn't new. It's been around for a couple of years, and we've seen this in Server 2016 and now Server 2019. One of the things I wanted to talk about was what Microsoft are doing around particularly with Server 2019 around supporting new hardware, in this case storage class memory. So basically this is storage in a DIMM slot. So it looks like memory, and it's high-speed storage, or it actually can be partitioned as either partly memory and partly high-speed storage. And this is meant to act as a cache to storage spaces direct. So you can have tiered storage in Windows Storage Spaces Direct. So in a hyper-converged infrastructure, your performance can be improved dramatically around just using this type of memory. I really wish I could give you a demo of Server 2019 with, and it's called Intel Optane DC Persistent Memory. I'd love to have given you a demo. I don't have any hardware where I can actually show you the performance of that. And then part of the story around that is to get better performance in a hyper-converged cluster when you need it. And we're not talking small performance increases. We're talking massive. If you think about the types of buses that we've been used to, we came from USB flash to SSD over SATA to NVMe SSDs, and now we're looking at storage. Every time we're doing that, we're trying to get the storage closer to the CPU, because that bus is massive. That's like 250 gigabits per second that we're talking about, the capability of that server bus. So in essence, this is giving you that performance and increasing that cache size dramatically when you use this with Storage Spaces Direct. So up until now, the kind of the real world SSD using NVMe SSDs, the IOs per second on a cluster has been around 6.7 million IOs per second. That's kind of like the maximum. And when that's looking at 4K random reads, I believe. So this is against a 16 server node running Server 2016. So if we look at what Microsoft wanted to do here was to not just look at theoretical limits anymore, but actually build some reference architecture and actually prove the performance of Server 2019 in where we're heading to with hyper-converged infrastructure, so Windows Storage Spaces Direct. And this is what they built it on. So the latest from Intel, and running Windows Server 2019 technical preview, and running Hyper-V and Windows Storage Spaces Direct. So using leading edge hardware, so those things we're kind of used to. NVMe was the SSD that they used for the bulk of the storage. They used the persistent memory that I just mentioned for the caching component, and obviously RDMA for hyper-converged infrastructure over 25 gig Ethernet. So that basically have very good storage and network bus for communication, and the results were 13.7, almost 13.8 million IOs per second across 300 virtual machines in that cluster. So from a scalability point of view and from a performance point of view, Server 2019 has more than doubled the capacity to grow and scale. From a performance point of view, which I think is pretty impressive. And again, that was 4K random reads. So this is not sequential, this is 4K random reads. So continuing across that hyper-converged infrastructure story, performance is one side of it, but capacity planning is another part of that, and a very important part of that. So Microsoft introduced System Insights, and the whole point of this is what you see on the screen in front of you. So they wanted something that was natively in Windows Server 2019 that gave people some information that was real and relevant, and tried to give us some predictive analytics about 4 key areas in Windows Server 2019. So those 4 key areas being volume consumption, total storage consumption, CPU forecasting or capacity, CPU capacity, and network capacity. So basically, when we're getting close to, not even when we're getting close to, that we know based on a certain pattern of usage, which is not going to be always 100% accurate because we're kind of crystal ball gazing here, right? And that's difficult at the best of times. But what we're trying to do is say, in X period of time, I'm going to hit a limit. And I'm going to tell you about that as early on as possible, because when you hit that limit, it's going to be impacting. Whether that's network, whether that's CPU, or whether that's storage. And we often see this more with storage because storage is one of those things that grows and grows and grows. But basically, we want to know that as early as possible. Well, one of those things is that by virtue of looking at that information and being aware of that information, you're able to make better decisions to lessen the impact to business. That's the whole goal here. And I wanted to show you what that looks like and how simple it is in Server 2019 to configure. So I'll just flick across again to my demo environment. So if we scroll down here to our, I'll have to choose a 2019 server. You'll notice that you may not have noticed, but on HV01P there, that's a 2016 server. I don't have that Insights capability. So I'm going to flick across to one of my scale out file servers here. which is running Server 2019 core in a scale-out file server hyper-converged setup. And if I scroll down here, I'll see on the left-hand side System Insights. And basically, System Insights is kind of a one-button turn on. I've already enabled it on this server, but basically, if I hadn't, there'd be an option there to click in. It would say, hey, the service is not installed. Would you like to install it? I say, yes, go ahead and install the service, and installs the service, and basically then goes and enables those 4 key areas of forecasting. So a really, really simple way of turning that on. These things are configurable. So CPU forecasting, by default, if I'm looking at that, say, once a day, it's probably not going to be really meaningful. I may want to turn that on to an hourly or even a per minute view of what my CPUs are doing. Obviously, there's going to be an overhead if I do that. There's going to be an impact to the system. So you need to be careful about how you set that forecasting, but setting it in a way that is more meaningful, or to give you more meaningful information. So if I want to do that hourly, and how often am I going to give a prediction? So I'm going to gather the data over a certain interval, and then I'm going to give you a prediction once every 12 hourly or daily or whatever that is. And then I can just modify that. And so what that looks like, if we just go back to, close that window and go back to our insights, and I think I'll pick storage insights, because that gives you a better idea of what you're looking at. My test environment's a little bit static, so there's not a lot of forecasting information. And in this case, it's saying we don't have enough recent data to make a prediction. So I might want to screw that down, or turn that regularity of how often I'm gathering that information initially to something more regular, so I can get a more, like a quicker forecasting of that statistic. And over time, after a week, I might want to turn that back down again. But obviously, the more data you have and the longer you have it running, the more accurate the predictive analysis is going to be. So I don't have a lot of data in my test environment to show you there. But this is kind of what it looks like when you do have a pattern or a predictive scenario. So what we're looking at here is this volume B in our storage analysis is telling us that within 3 days, we're expecting that you're going to run out of space. Hopefully you'd get, the earlier you turn this on, and based on that pattern, you might get that information earlier on. But right now, this slide is showing this in 3 days, we're going to see that, that storage run out. So if we click on that, there was a link there, and I flicked past it pretty quickly, but the link there says view 3 suggested actions. So if you click on those 3 suggested actions for that particular volume, there's an option there to extend the volume, to go ahead and let's do a shameless plug Microsoft for another Microsoft product that might help you out related to storage, which is Azure File Sync. Do you want to set up Azure File Sync? And do you need to run a disk cleanup? So these are actions that when you click on them will take you directly to that action in the Windows Admin Center to perform that or to set that up. So again, we're looking at trying to manage these servers efficiently without having to go to that server's management console, without spending the time RDPing, connecting in, launching that console, going to the server manager, selecting the volume and extending it. Whereas we go here, we click extend volume, it takes us straight to that capacity in the admin center, or that capability in the admin center, and then we say extend our volume. So again, ease of management is key in Microsoft's thinking around this. To improve business efficiency, give us more time to do the management of those systems. One of the things, and we saw a link to it there on the previous slide, is around Azure File Sync. So Azure File Sync is, think of the Azure File Service in Azure capable of synchronizing hot data down to satellite sites. So we've seen this technology from other vendors before. The benefit here is that the bulk of your data, and as data grows, consumes storage in Azure that is at a lower cost than what you should be paying for more performance storage on premises, closer to your users, closer to your applications, but you pull down just what is actually used, the hot data, rather than pulling down all of the data or requiring all of that data on all of those branch office sites. Because once you do that, if you have 10 terabytes of data, in Azure and you want to replicate it all to all of your sites, then you need 10 terabytes at each of those sites. If you've got the hot cache being 1 terabyte, then obviously you don't need to have 10 terabytes of raw storage sitting there waiting to be allocated, waiting to be used. And it's far more flexible for me to increase my storage in Azure at a lower cost than it is to go and buy more storage on premises, where it's going to be more performant, but at a higher cost. So reducing cost is one of the things here. So previously the Azure file share was limited to 5 terabytes. And this capability was fantastic, but people wanted more. And so what Microsoft have done is they've now increased that capability for the Azure file share to grow to 100 terabytes per file share, which is a pretty significant increase in one release. So going from 5 terabytes up to 100 terabytes. So the capability to expand, or the capacity of Azure to expand as your storage needs grow is there now. That 5 terabytes to us in IT doesn't seem like a lot. 100 terabytes to me seems still like a pretty significant amount of storage. So moving along in the hyper-converged infrastructure story, there's a component called storage migration service, and this is the one that I'm really excited about. I looked at this pre-Ignite and saw it at Ignite, and it is one of those that is really one of those services that you think about and you think, why did it take this long for this to be produced? So basically the storage migration service, Microsoft heard this from their customers. All of these things, when you're migrating data, it's not easy. So when you're going from a physical server to a virtual server, when you're going from one data center to another data center, when a data center, a private cloud provider says we're retiring that infrastructure, we need to move to new infrastructure. We need to migrate data. We need to go from A to B. When Microsoft release a new operating system, we want you to run Server 2019. It's hard to get to 2019. How many times have we skipped a release? We might have installed Server 2008 R2, skipped 2012, we went 2012 R2 because we don't want to upgrade or migrate because it's hard. We don't, there might be things in that operating system that we need to improve our business, but the effort to get there is a lot harder. So when you're migrating data, and I'm probably focusing more on unstructured data here, so file servers is probably the scenario right now. We need to migrate everything. We need to know that we've got all the data. We need to know that we've got permissions. We need to know that we've got the shares. We need to know that we've got, if we're migrating the identity of that computer, the IP addressing of that computer, if we don't want to go ahead and change group policy or whatever we're using to map drives, login scripts, all of those types of things, right? This is not easy stuff. If you've gone through it, yeah, we can do it, but it's complicated and it's time consuming. You don't want this. So the storage migration service migrates unstructured data. Basically, the slide says from anywhere. I'll say from Windows anywhere, Windows Server anywhere, into Azure, so you can go straight to a Azure file sync, and modern file servers. The idea being that it's fast, it's a quicker way of doing that, it's a consistent approach to doing that, and it's also scalable. So it's not aimed at just large markets. You don't have to spend all of this money on this massive tool. And the idea being that it's an elegant, easy to use workflow or graphical tool that enables you to do that in a more structured way. So built into the Windows Admin Center, but you already knew I was going to say that, right? Because that's our approach, and that's our goal here, to have everything within, or capability to do things from the one Windows Admin Center console. What was really interesting here is that Microsoft didn't say, hey, we've got Server 2019 released, we're going to let you upgrade from 2016 to 2019. They went all the way back to Server 2003 and said, we're going to let you migrate if your source server is Server 2003. Of course, there are going to be some caveats, right? If you're running Server 2003 on FAT32, I'm pretty sure we're going to run into some problems. Did Server 2003 support FAT32? I can't remember. It was that long ago. Anyway, but the capability of the source is what impressed me here. In earlier years, we've heard of a product, hey, that's great. We can take you from 2012 R2 to 2016. Microsoft is saying we can take you from 2003 to 2019. And it's not a paid option. So this is in Windows Server Standard, and this is in Windows Server Data Center. This is fantastic. This is a great tool. And when I show it to you, we'll demo this in a few minutes, that will make life a lot easier. So there are three main phases there. There's an inventory phase where you basically go through and look at the source server, look at the information that is on that server, and catalog that. And there's a transfer phase where you go ahead and you do some validation and you transfer data. And then there's the cutover phase where you basically go and say, I'm ready to migrate now. Let's stop people accessing the old server. Let's cut over to the new server. And the whole point of this is to make our migrations easier, to be able to allow us to get from point A to point B a lot easier. So in the past, it's been a challenge, right? It has always been a challenge. So let me just flick across. The question is, am I demoing Server 2003 to 2019? I couldn't get my hands on a Server 2003 server because it's not supported anymore. But what I'm doing is I'm taking a look at Server 2016 to 2019 in my test environment. So I'm going to jump across to this server, which is called 2019-03V. And if I scroll down here, there's a section there called Storage Migration Service. And what you'll see is I've already created a job. Creating the job is basically just going ahead, giving the job a name, telling it the Storage Migration Service what my source server is. So once that comes up, come on, Storage Migration Service. The demos have been going okay today. Let's kick that again. Storage Migration Service. Okay, this is still preview software, so I'm hoping we'll get. Oh no. All right, let me just refresh that. I really want this to work because I really wanted to show you this. This is an awesome technology, an awesome solution. All right. Storage migration. Let's go. All right, so you get storage migration in 3 steps. So they give you the little splash screen telling you those 3 steps that we've already looked at. So what you'll notice, I've created my job I mentioned. It's telling me the phase, giving me some overview information, how many inventories I've done, how many are currently running. So a good overview status. So I'm going to go into the job that I've already created, and I mentioned it's a very simple setup. I've already got my credentials there, and I'm not going to run through and approve all of these because it'll take a little bit more time than I have. And that's part of the reason why I'm showing you one that I've pre-created here. Oops, I'm on cutover. Let's flick across to inventory devices. Sorry, I was on the cutover phase. So basically, we provide some credentials for our source server. In this case, my server is HOTST 2016. Once we do that, we add devices and we scan those devices. So you can see I've done a scan here. I haven't got a lot of data, but it's telling us that the scan succeeded. It found 3.84 gig of data, 256 files. And there's some information about the data share that exists on that server. So in this case, in my test environment, this is a very simple setup. And it's told me that it's succeeded in that scan. And I can look at the configuration of that server, how many volumes I've got, how many network adapters I've got, the information that I might need to know. Have I missed anything in my scan? Am I happy with what that's discovered? So basically, when we then move on to transferring data, so we've done our initial inventory of our source server. We go through and we get some credentials for the destination device. So I've got a server that's up and running, in this case, server 2019, because that's my target. And I then move on and say, okay, what is my destination mapping? So what do I want to take from that source server? Do I want to take everything? Or do I only want to take, so in the volume selection, I've got, okay, the source volume C. I want to match that to the target volume C. If it was a data volume that was D, I might want to match that to E drive on my new server, rather than the D drive if I wanted to change that. This is the share that we've found, and I've got the ability, if I had multiple shares here, I don't have to include all of those shares. I can include the ones that I need to migrate to that new server, not necessarily absolutely everything, but I can grab everything if I want. So then we move on to adjusting settings for that destination server. Do I want, when I'm transferring data, because we're under the transferring data phase, do I want to do a CRC checksum? I probably do, not necessarily in my test environment. Is there a maximum duration that I want that to run for? And this is the bit that looks very much like robocopy. How many retries do I want within, whatever period of time? Don't ask me if it's robocopy under the hood. And then we go through a validation process when we're transferring data, because one of the things, if you've ever done server migrations, is you want to know that the data on the source on the target matches, right, before you cut over. So you go through and run a validation. It's telling me that my validation hasn't run here. So if I go ahead and validate that, shouldn't take too long. It tells me I've got a warning. In this case, I think this is because I'm in preview. It's telling me the credential that has administrative privileges, we can't validate against the target remotely. But later on, it tells me that it passes. So just ignore those warnings at the moment. But the validation is, does the destination exist? Does the source volume exist? Does the destination volume exist? All of those things that you need to make sure, is there enough free space to make sure that we're going to be able to transfer the data before we transfer the data. So once I've reviewed those settings, I can then go ahead and start my transfer. And, in this case, I've already run a transfer. I can run this transfer multiple times, and we'll get a status of succeeded in this case. If I select that, one of the interesting things is I can actually go ahead and see some detail around that data transfer and have a look at the transfer log. Now, this is important from an auditing point of view. So hopefully I've got nothing that was missed, but what I really want to see is, here's an auditable list of the files that I've migrated, so that after migration, or if I'm validating that I've got everything I think I've got, did we transfer that all across? If someone comes to you after you've migrated to the new server and says, hey, I don't have my files, you can say, hold on, let me go back to my audit log. Actually, we don't have, that wasn't in any of the shares. Your data wasn't on that server. Or, no, we definitely got that, because I can see the migration in the audit log, sorry, the copy of that, transfer of that file in my audit log. So that's an important part of that validation process. And then basically, once we've done that validation, we're ready to cut over. So again, we can do that multiple times. Obviously, you do your last transfer once people are not modifying files on your source system. Validate our credentials once more. We look at the server that we're going to migrate to, in this case, HOTST 20, sorry, the source server that we're migrating from, TST 2016, to 2019-02V. What's really interesting here is what we're doing, we have the capability right now, without this step, to migrate to that new server under a different name, a different IP address, and a different identity if we want to. The share is there, the permissions are there, the metadata is already there on that new server, and I could just cut across to that if I wanted to and leave the source server as is. Or, what I love about this, going from server 2016, bear that in mind, we're going from server 2016 or whatever previous version to 2019, I can say, and I'm just going to choose DHCP there for the time being, what I'm doing here is saying, I'm going to take the identity from your source server, I'm going to apply the identity to the target server. If your share name's the same and your permissions are already there, what else do I have to do? I cut over. Do I have to modify any login scripts? Do I have to modify any permissions? Do I have to set up any share permissions? Everything is there ready to go. We rename the source server. We give it a different IP address. We give the target server the identity, the same name and the same IP address as the source server. Our shares are there. Our data is there. We've migrated. I think that's pretty fantastic. I love it. In the past, if you wanted to go from 2016 or you wanted to change operating systems, you had to do this you had to migrate all of the data and then change the back end to support that, right? In one step, we're going from 2016 to 2019 and changing the identity. If you use something like Azure Site Recovery or you use VM replication, sure, you can take the identity of the source and you can move it to a target, but it's still the same operating system. And then you have to do an in-place upgrade if you want an in-place upgrade. You don't have a clean install of the operating system. So we're doing that in one step, which I think is a pretty impressive approach and a pretty impressive task. So that's Windows Storage Migration Service. One thing to point out in that whole process, I don't have to go to 2019. So if I wanted to take something to 2016, I can still use that tool, but somewhere in that I need a 2019 server to act as a proxy. Microsoft say it won't be as quick either, so there are some performance improvements in Server 2019 with the storage migration that make that a lot faster. But it's certainly capable. We don't have to go directly to 2019, but if you got that capability and you wanted to move to 2019, why wouldn't you? Then it's there. Is that only good for file servers was the question. At the moment, that's where it's targeted for. So unstructured storage. Not sure what the future of this will be, whether it'll be more of a, we'll take SQL or, those application type servers and help us to migrate those. Sorry, say that again. Are there any major benefits? Okay, yep. So are there any benefits to the storage migration service over using the distributed file system to migrate to a new server? So the advantage is you don't have to set up all of your share permissions on your target. You don't worry if you don't have DFS set up. You don't have to set up DFS to do that for you. The identity changes, although in DFS it's a little bit simpler, isn't it? Because you're pointing to an abstracted namespace rather than the share name directly. But yeah, so I think there are some advantages. I think it's simpler from that workflow than using DFS, which is probably what a lot of people have done in the past. So good question. Wanted to talk a little bit about what's new for storage in Windows Server 2019. Time check. And basically, I'm running a little bit short of time. I need to move a little bit more quickly. There's quite a, sorry? How does the storage migration service deal with long file names? Yep. Yeah, if you're over a certain length, it would be dependent on how the file system handles that, because you're talking at the volume layer, not necessarily the share name. If the volume supports it, then you should be fine. I don't know definitively what the restrictions are there. Yep. Yep. Anyway, I need to move on. I'm running short of time. I've still got quite a bit I want to cover. There's quite a bit new for storage in Windows Server 2019. And admin center integration, we've talked a little bit about. Deduplication with REFS volumes is an important thing. The REFS file system is far more resilient than NTFS. I know we had deduplication in NTFS. Efficiency around, or efficiency in mirror accelerated parity. So this is just talking about hyper-converged, Windows storage spaces direct clusters, and improving resiliency across that RAID. If you want some more detail on that, Microsoft has some good guidance, or reach out to me. I can tell you a little bit more about that. I just don't have time today. Storage class memory support, we've already talked about. That's the Intel Optane memory. Cluster sets, so the capability to scale across multiple clusters to treat them as though they're one cluster. So an efficiency there of, rather than having to manage multiple clusters, if you hit those limits, you treat them as essentially as managing one cluster. So some improvements in management there. And scale around the capability for storage spaces direct to increase in what it can handle and the amount of storage you throw at it. And that's something I wanted to move through fairly quickly now, is a little bit of history around storage, where we've come from. Everyone knows what a gigabyte is, right? I'd assume by now everyone in the IT industry should know what a gig is, and everyone would know what a terabyte is. One of my colleagues just bought a very cheap 1 terabyte SSD, consumer grade of course, but still 1 terabyte is incredibly cheap. I couldn't believe it, but we know what a terabyte is. We should know, a lot of people should know, have heard of what a petabyte is, right? So I think that's 1,000 terabytes. So it's starting to get to a pretty big number. What Microsoft wanted to do was to take away those storage scale limitations in storage spaces direct clusters. And so basically, they've increased the capacity of a single storage spaces direct cluster to support 4 petabytes of storage. Now, I don't know what that means. So if you take all of Wikipedia in every language with its complete edit history, uncompressed, 50 times, that's 4 petabytes. So Microsoft didn't want this to be a theoretical limit. So what they did is they got some reference hardware again, created with these people, created a reference architecture, which is what you're seeing on the screen in front of you, and decided to push the real boundaries of storage in a hyper-converged cluster. They built this. And the figure they came up with was they created a single storage spaces direct cluster that contained 3.64 petabytes of raw storage. Now, once you format that out, you want redundancy, that drops down, right? But there's a cluster that has 3.64 petabytes of raw storage. Usable, I think it was something like 2.7 in that storage spaces direct cluster. So that's a lot of storage in one hyper-converged cluster. So I wanted to talk a little bit now about security, and I'll have to move through this fairly quickly. I'm running short of time. So there's a service in Azure called password protection, and the whole idea of this is it's a service that you can set up to try and eliminate weak passwords. And the problem with weak passwords, I don't know if they're the bane of enterprise security, but they're a problem, right? People use weak passwords. Password 1, password 2, password 3, September 2018, September 2019, what's my favorite football team, what's my favorite soccer team? Put a number on the end, put the year on the end, put my birth date in there. These are not secure passwords. The latest guidance from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, says it's actually not good practice now to have short, complex passwords. People find them hard to remember. They write them down. Let's have longer, easier to remember passwords. The trouble with that, the flip side of that, the longer a password is, the longer it takes to crack under a brute force attack. But people will still generally use dictionary words, and dictionary attacks can be more effective against those. Still more complex and is better, but it's still a problem. Microsoft say move away from passwords entirely. You know, that's the direction we want to be in, but that's hard, and we're not there yet, right? So what do we do to reduce the impact? Because what happens when a password gets compromised? It's business impacting. As time evolved, you lose information. You lose important company information. You know, if you malware as a result onto people's computers because of a weak password, ransomware, that costs businesses money. You lose data, you lose employee time. So Azure AD banned passwords was the concept of saying, here's a password list of weak passwords that Microsoft have come up with, and I think the guidance is 10,000 passwords is a good start. The actual number of passwords that you don't want as weak passwords is probably much higher than that, but 10,000 is a good start. The goal here was to stop weak passwords. So basically using some very clever techniques with password hashing when people are trying to set passwords to say, no, that's not a secure password. And the goal of password protection for on-premises server Active Directory was to not reinvent that in a less capable solution. The server team went, we've got an Azure service that's already doing this. So let's take advantage of that. Let's use this integration. Let's think of this in a hybrid world. Let's hook Server 2019 into Azure Active Directory, into that service, that banned password service, and let's make that available on premises. So domain controllers don't need to talk to Azure directly. There's a proxy service that handles that. We'll go ahead and use the Azure banned password list service, and if someone tries to set their Active Directory on premises password with a weak password, it'll say, sorry, no. That's a password that we won't let you use. And you can customize that. You can add your own passwords in. Jasco 123, Microsoft 123, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm sure they're all there in the banned password list. But you get the idea, right? It's available from 2012 R2 onwards, 2012 domain controller. So this is a domain controller version. So domain controllers need to be running 2012 R2 or later right now for this service to work. 2012 is not confirmed. I'm not sure if it will be given 2012. It's still a while from end of support, but right now, if you've got 2012 R2 domain controllers and you've got the Azure service, you can hook those into. Do I need a Server 2019 domain controller in my environment? That's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that. But this service, domain controller needs to be at 2012 R2 or later. All right. And the last bit I wanted to talk about is called Features on Demand, which is aimed at Windows Server Core. So with the advent of Windows Admin Center, Microsoft is saying we should be moving to Server Core. Why should we move to Server Core? So in my mind, the size of the OS. People knew me last year. They would have known I was a big fan of Nano because I love the fact that I could have a Hyper-V server with drivers installed, running on hardware in 1 gig or less. You know, the size of my OS was small. Why is that important? Because the larger my OS volume across 20, across 40, across 100 servers is wasted space, wasted storage that I'm paying for. That's storage at a cost on premises, right? We want to keep the OS small. That's number one. Number two, the surface area of attack. As soon as I have an operating system with a GUI, my surface area of attack increases because there are more applications installed. And if you have a web browser and you have a GUI, when people are setting up a server, what are they going to do? They're going to go straight to the internet from that server, probably before your anti-malware tools are installed. Hopefully, you know, Windows Defender ATP is marked for installation on that server, but the potential is that someone downloads something malicious on that server as you're building it. That's the capability of having that on that GUI-based server, right? It's not great practice. I don't expect anyone here to have done that, but there's a potential for it to happen. The other one is profile bloat. So the more people that RDP to a server that has a GUI to manage that server, you create a profile, you consume more storage, the size of the OS volume grows, you say, okay, now I need to give more space to the OS volume to cater for that, and again, you're wasting more storage. There are also some challenges around applications that support Server Core. So there are minimal local tools in Server Core. It's very bare, right? The things that we're used to using to manage and build a server are not there. Windows Admin Center really helps that. And that point I made before was that, can you do it? Can you use Windows Admin Center? And yes, you can. You can do all of those things that you're used to doing when you RDP to a server from the Windows Admin Center. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but it's doable. And it's actually really quite straightforward and really easy to do, the way that the Windows Admin Center works. Application support is a bit of a problem. Installers might not like Windows Core. They might be expecting something that's installed on the full GUI, even if they're not using that. So they might do a check to say, hey, is Internet Explorer there? Yeah, it's there. Okay, I'm never going to use it, but I need to check that it's there first. So this might be from the previous history 10 years ago when that installer did need Internet Explorer or did whatever, you know, whatever that requirement is. That's some of the challenges that we have. So the features on demand is meant to ease that application compatibility side. So when you install Server Core, it's incredibly bare. The features on demand is an additional download. It's 340 meg, and it contains those tools that you're used to. So you can get it from insiders. You can get it as part of VLSC, Eval Center, and it's for app compatibility. What does it include? So on the OS components on the right-hand side, things that you're used to using that are not there in Core. If you need to use them, or if an application, if you're doing debugging, if something happens to a server and you lose network connectivity, you still need to be able to do some debugging, right, from the server console. If those tools aren't there, if I can't run the event viewer to see what's going on with that server, I'm in a little bit of trouble. So there are some situations where you're still going to want to be doing some of these debugging, or you require these tools to be there. So right down the bottom, you'll notice an Internet Explorer is optional. So if you really, 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 really need it, don't install it. No, I'm kidding. But it's there if you really need it, right? But again, point in case before, you don't want to put Internet Explorer on a server. Um, Applications out of the box that support this. Had an interesting conversation with my colleague around the release of Skype 2019. Not sure yet. It's not on this list, but this is about 3 weeks, 4 weeks old, this slide. So Exchange Server 2019, SQL, the DB Engine, the Server Management Studio, Team Foundation Server, they all work on Server Core, and Microsoft are going to be pushing Server Core more and more to give you that capability so that you can get the benefits of running Server Core, the ones that we mentioned. The efficiencies in space, the security, those are the things we're looking for. And features on demand makes it easier for us to use Server Core, to take away some of that pain. That and Windows Admin Center makes it easier for us to manage Server Core and get those benefits. Looking forward with Server 2019, if I've by mistake said Server 2016 when I meant 2019, and you picked it up today, let me know. But in 2019, looking forward, what's the release going to look like? Every 2 weeks, we'll see updates from the Insider program. So for Server 2019 in the Insider, the Admin Center. With Server 2019 Core, we'll see semi-annual channel release for that and the Admin Center. So every 6 months, like we see with Windows 10 Pro now, we'll see a 6-month release of Server 2019. And then the long-term servicing channel, which is your more stable channel. So Server 2016 was on that channel. There's a 2019 long-term servicing branch, and that's going to be like that stable release. There'll be a feature release maybe 18 months, in 18 months time. But where I need stability over features, this is where you need to use Server 2019 long-term servicing branch. So to wrap up, when I searched, or when I had a look to see what headlines were out there about Server 2019 and the comments about Cloud Ready, you know what? I didn't find a lot. I don't know if it's too early yet. Server 2019 still hasn't been quote unquote officially released yet. So maybe once people have a chance, you know, the broader community has a chance to adopt that, they'll make some more comments about, is this cloud ready? Is this what a cloud operating system is? Or are people at the point where they're saying, you know what, it's a given that the way we're integrating, it depends really on what your interpretation or what your definition of cloud ready is. But when it all boils down to it. But what's impressed me in Server 2019 was a lot of that improvement around the capability, the ease with which to do things, to say things like use Server Core, and here's a great tool, the Windows Admin Center, to make that easier. Right? The things we've looked at around hybrid management, managing from one console, hardware together with software, managing the integration pieces with Azure, and all of this is aimed to make our lives easier, to reduce costs, have performance where we need it, have the capacity to grow where we need it. And one of the things that we noticed, particularly with 2019 coming into the semi-annual channel release cadence, that 6-monthly release, is that we're going to see Server 2019 grow. You're not going to have to wait for 3 years to see the next feature list. In 6 months, you're going to get a bunch of new features with Server 2019 that hopefully, based on user feedback, are going to be valuable features. You know, Server 2019 is not going to be stale, it's going to grow. I think we're going to see more and more of that hybrid integration, particularly with Azure, but with cloud services in general. And the whole point here is that to be able to use, and I think I mentioned this before, Server 2019, where it makes sense. So where it makes sense for your business. Do we do it on premises? Do we do it in Azure? Do we do it on AWS? You know, where do we install 2019? And how do we use it, and how do we integrate it with those services? So that's all I had today. Hopefully it's been valuable. I hope you enjoyed the session. The Ignite content, again, is available at that link. Please visit us at Jasco if you've got any questions. We are posting the recordings from these sessions up there if you want to go back and rewatch, or if people joined the call late, or other people you know might be interested, please shoot through the links to them once we've uploaded that. Next week, I want to talk about leveraging the power of Microsoft threat protection to the modern workplace. So that's all I had for today. I think we are out of time. I've probably gone a little bit over. If you had any questions, either throw them in the chat window. I'm 6 minutes over. I apologize for that. Frank, yeah.
So just a couple of them. I don't know right on my idea. With the administration stuff.
Yeah.
As a server administrator, I don't want to have to jump into each individual server. Is there like a multi-server dashboard view, or even an automated email alert once you're about it?
Yeah. So the first part of the question is there an overview of where I can see all of that information relating to across multiple servers? So from a backup point of view, can I see that across multiple servers? Right now, no. So you might have noticed in the first page that I went to, it listed the servers that I could manage, but looking at managing those as individual servers, when you have a cluster, there are certain things that you can do from a cluster point of view that you wouldn't do necessarily on individual servers. So storage is a good one there. I can look at storage for a cluster, not just storage on an individual server. But generally right now, it's a server-centric approach. And the second part of that question was, can you alert on events happening? So with the insight stuff, yes.
For example, that graph we had.
Yeah, so yes, the answer is yes, you can. So you can create alerts based on when I have an event, I want to know about that, send me an email.
The other one was with the storage migration.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not, given what the product's designed to do, it's probably not a real requirement.
Yep.
Can you do any bandwidth throttling on that?
That's a very good question. Can I do any bandwidth throttling on the storage migration services? Right now, in the transfer, I haven't seen anything around that yet. So get onto the user feedback hub at Microsoft and request that. That's a great idea. Definitely. Yep. Yeah.
And just one other one. When you were in the Windows administration server and you pointed to another server,
Yeah.
what did you have to do with that server to make it manageable?
I installed the gateway service. To make the server that I'm looking at manageable, nothing. Had to turn on nothing, didn't have to install an agent. So basically, I entered my credentials. I said, add a server, entered the credentials, and now I can manage that server. Yep. So I don't have to install anything to be able to manage a server via the Windows Admin Center. So I'm getting the wrap up. I'm 9 minutes over, so I need to wrap up there. Were there any other questions that people wanted to ask? I'll stop the recording there. Thank you.